I have to admit, I did not prepare an opening monologue, so I'm winging this. And I kind of feel like long before The Weeknd, Justin Bieber, all these other bands, sometime shortly after Shania Twain, emerged Uncle Seth. And
wow.
I know. And considering the impact this band made, it's worth noting it only put it out in 2.5 albums. Really, it had 2 albums and an EP. It kind of had some other stuff going on too, but it's pretty amazing that Uncle Seth, and I think it found its niche in the podcast community, which is pretty awesome because that's where I got to know you guys. And it's pretty exciting to be here with you guys 20 years after the release of Lame Suburban Poetry, which we'll get to the album title at some point in this discussion. There's a million things to cover. And I think Jay has only allotted 90 minutes, of which we burned 15 minutes just being children. So first of all, I think probably what we should do is we should go around the room, and I'm going to call you guys out in order, just because that way we can follow how, I don't know if you guys are seeing the same order on your screen as I'm seeing on mine. So I'll walk through the order, and you guys can introduce yourselves and your role in the band and on the album, and then we'll launch into a discussion. So Jay happens to be in the top left, so I'll start with him. So hopefully he doesn't chew up all the time.
Yeah, let's hope. Anything can happen. I'm Jay Muna. I was one of the founding members of the band. I played primarily harmonica on Lame Suburban Poetry, although I played other instruments too, which I may talk about in terms of the songs. Later on, I played bass and other things. I was one of the songwriters, although we'll probably talk about too how just about everybody contributed to that. And yeah, that's me.
All right, thank you, Tara.
I'm Tara. I'm an alcoholic. No, sorry. That was later. I'm Tara. Go by Amaya currently with solo stuff, and whenever I do that, I sometimes did vocals for the band. I sometimes pretended to do vocals for the band. Did some songwriting. Played trumpet poorly.
I didn't see those shows.
Shaker, but that's another story for another day.
That's coming up.
Okay, hold on. Shaker and trumpet. I'm going to make a note here. Shaker.
I have photos of
trumpet.
the trumpet.
And that's,
I think other podcasters have photos.
That was Tara that said that, right? Not Jeff. Tara. Okay. No, Jeff. All right. Jeff, you're up.
I also am founding member of the band. I think I came up with a stupid name. I don't know if it's stupid, but I play guitar and write and occasionally sang very poorly, although I like to feel like I'm better now. But yes.
I don't know. I've listened to the songs. Anybody who's singing seems to be in tune, and auto tune was not a thing back then. So.
Oh, we have a story about that. But anyway.
Uh-oh. Auto tune. Come back to that one later on. All right. This is going to be a long evening, folks. All right. Drew, over to you.
Drew Moncars, played bass, met Jay through my cousin Brian. Jay was working at Robarts. Remember that?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
And played bass, was with the band for less than a year. But
I just looked it up. Your first gig to your last gig was 5 months.
No.
Yeah, but then you guessed it a bunch of times, so it probably felt like longer. But you only really, as a member of the band, you were only in the band like 5 or 6 months.
Crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Sure, it wasn't.
Yeah,
longer.
January to June, but then you played like a few times later.
When did we record this thing?
It was January.
Yeah.
But you would have rehearsed with us for a month.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. You would have been in.
I thought it was the better part of like the academic year.
I think probably, yeah, I don't know. That's probably true because you probably came in to start rehearsing with us earlier, for sure. So sorry.
We're a little Spinal Tap with bass players. So.
I'm very excited. I've got to jump in since Tara gave me the opening. I was half a bass player for Uncle Seth at one gig. Actually, I was half a bass player in one song, maybe 2 songs at an Uncle Seth gig in Kingston. And there's a photo of Bob fretting the notes and me plucking the notes. I was wearing the bass. And I'm sure somewhere off camera, Jay is yelling out the chords. Yeah. So I feel very excited to have been part of the bass legacy of this band, to your point, Tara, I know that Drew started out on bass, Jay ended up on bass, and somehow I displaced him for a few minutes. So
Yes, you probably needed a
Then
beer.
he did.
yeah.
Sorry, Drew. Anyway, we interrupted Drew.
No. So anyway, so it was like I think it was one academic year,
Sounds
and
right.
then like it was like school. Like I remember I was like guys I have to work on my masters, like, and then that was it. But then like my 30th birthday,
Mm-hmm.
you guys were there.
Yes.
There's a picture of like I still have a picture of me and my brother and Brian. And if you recall, the night ended with a 7 guitar player version of Freebird.
Remember it very
And that
well.
was like my birthday is July, so that was July 02. So I don't know where that was in sort of like the recording and gigging, but you guys were definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would have been that would have been like after we finished recording, just before the album was going to come out, and then you came and played with us for the release.
Right, but you guys were there at my birthday.
But we were at the
so
birthday.
I don't know if
I
hadn't
remember
left
that
the
too. I was
band yet
thinking
or
about
whatever.
that. That was great.
I
Yeah.
have no recollection of any of
No,
that.
yeah, actually, Tara, to be fair, I don't think Tara was there. I think you were
Okay, yeah.
I remember
I remember that was epic. The Freebird Jam was.
Yeah, but that was wild.
So I'm starting to put pieces together here. You said you started recording the album in January of 2002?
That's right.
And the album came out August 15th, 2002.
That's right.
Sounds right.
This is like a very Def Leppard.
Well, Mark's got all his arms. There's that.
Mark, your mic. Brian. Sorry, not Mark. Brian, your mic.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on. Thanks,
Jim, no
Drew.
one laughed at my joke.
Oh no!
Sorry, cousin Brian.
No.
I was told explicitly, whatever Brian says, don't laugh.
Well, I was muted because I was. It's a long story. Anyways, I'll go.
All right.
World-class
So over to you,
engineer,
Brian.
Brian
You're in the
Moncars.
middle
Where
of
the
my
mute
screen
button
here.
is.
So Brian, over to you.
Over to me. I'm Brian Moncars, and well, I guess I was most likely brought into the project by Jay, because Jay and I are both RTA, Radio and Television Arts, Ryerson alumni. Jay was actually my teaching assistant, oddly enough, which
I was your teacher.
You were my teacher, and I guess in 2002. So I to backtrack, I guess I engineered, mixed, somewhat produced the record, but it would have probably been one of my first projects, one of my first album projects, I would think. I mean, I sort of opened the studio in 2000, and and then you guys entrusted me with your work in 2002.
Which studio, Brian? Which studio were we at? Were we at Troyano's studio? Like, which version of it was it?
No, it was at MCS. It was like at Queen and River.
Oh, that was the first studio. It was the
first studio because I was there for 5 years. I've moved a lot over the last 20 years.
And actually, just as a fun side note to that, I think we recorded in your first 3 studios, because we recorded with you there. We recorded with you when you were on, I think it was Gerard.
Or Jarvis. I was on
Jarvis. That's what it was.
The old number 9.
Well, that area, right? And then when you went up into when you went up to the old Troyano studio, we recorded with you guys there.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, I think we were there.
3. You followed me around.
And we followed you around.
We're kind of like that.
Yeah.
We really are.
We don't leave.
20 years later.
Remora, they attach themselves to the shark.
Yeah.
All right. So let's round out the group with Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Mark, and I'm the reason this was late because I don't know how to use Google Meet. But apparently, I'm in the witness protection program here, and I'm the drummer. So I guess there's probably a joke there, right?
I mean,
nobody has a joke.
I mean,
No, officer, I don't
Brian
find
had
that
something
funny.
really funny, but he was on mute.
Yeah.
Mark, as always, is being modest. He's also he's a fantastic drummer, but he's also a really good guitar player and played guitar on a couple tracks, and is also a really good writer. Wrote some of the better tracks on the album.
You'll have to remind me which ones those were, because I can't remember.
I will. We'll get to that.
So I actually have a bunch of questions about the songwriting, but I'm struck with the question first that I'm going to direct at Brian, since he started talking about the fact that this was one of the first projects he produced, and he produced you guys 3 times. What struck you about Uncle Seth? Like, what was it that attracted you to this band or the project, aside from the fact that your cousin was in it? And Jay, and Jay, your teacher,
Buddha.
you know, there's
And Jay
probably
was my
some sort of
teacher.
grading opportunity here too.
Yeah.
To be fair, I'd long since not been his teacher.
Yes, I graduated in
since graduated.
'98.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just, you know, I'm a huge fan of good songwriting, jam bands that can, bands that can play where the musicianship is top notch, great vocal, and to me, Uncle Seth kind of checked off all those boxes. It was a good, good fun project to work on.
You pronounce money wrong. Sorry.
I did want to add something a little to that though, because I remember the first day that Brian and I met was when we were getting introduced to the new students. I was a TA really, so I was like, basically giving out CDs and sound effect CDs and things in the audio lab. So I wasn't doing really that much teaching per se. But anyway, we got introduced to the new students, and I remember Brian, you came in, you were wearing a Blues Traveler t-shirt, and I'm like,
that's right,
we're gonna be friends.
Yeah, I was a huge Blues Traveler fan as well. Obviously,
so
coming up.
That was the connection started like from the moment I saw him. I knew
it was that Scene 4 t-shirt.
Oh,
that's right, exactly.
Four of them. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jeff.
And that's interesting because we probably said, not just because Jay's playing harmonica, when you go back and listen to this stuff, you immediately go, yeah, there is like a Blues Traveler thing happening. Like
there definitely is, like even in Drew's bass playing, like
and
there's
Drew as well,
definitely it's like there's a vibe of Blues Traveler throughout. And it's I mean, that's a cool thing.
Yeah, sure.
Although there's a lot of vibes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Brian used a term that's very interesting, and I'll throw to Jeff to answer this one, although I could throw to Drew, so both of you guys can fight off each other on this one. He referred to you guys as a jam band. And I definitely enjoyed seeing Uncle Seth live, and you guys put on great shows. I don't know that I would have jumped to jam band as a description. So is there something I'm missing?
Well, in terms of the bands that it's weird. There were times when we dabbled in that kind of thing, like mainly because a plurality of people in the band were like that. And sometimes we were playing sort of jam band settings. Like we would play, like there's a sort of hippie jam band festival called the Come Together Music Festival that we played. Or there were these nights at the Elmo before it was redone, when it was kind of a middling weird club that was kind of all a hippie night. There's lots of pot being smoked. And so we would kind of dabble in that, but we were never really good at like doing that. And what we were like, we weren't at our best doing that, certainly. So we ended up just relying on songwriting. You know what I mean? Like it ends up falling back on the song and tightening up the song. And if there's a solo section, I think I can't remember what year it was, but when we decided, we're going to set the length of our solos, it really helped everything. It really.
What was the length of the solo?
Yeah, 16 bars.
Okay.
The limit was a lovely thing.
Not enough for me to leave stage, go to the bathroom, and come back on stage.
Although it often went to 19 bars, and that threw everyone off, especially
Somebody lost count.
That's right.
I think what I meant by jam band wasn't necessarily like Fish, but more so just the feeling you get when you listen to the music, in terms, like it does feel somewhat improvisational at times, and more of like a band playing together.
Right.
Yeah.
And to include Andrew again, Andrew said an email to me today. Sorry, can't call you Andrew. Drew said to me.
I was like, "Who are you talking about?"
Yeah, who's
Andrew? It says Andrew on the screen here. So.
He said,
is that why?
He said he just mentioned, no one makes music like this anymore, and I think there's sort of something to that. There's like, in my dabbling with production stuff, which I now do at home, everyone is locked to a robotic click track. Like everyone and it makes some great music sometimes. But anyway, so like Drew had this comment with nobody makes music like this anymore. And I was wondering if that's what you were talking about when you were saying that, like people playing together in a room when songs written, or
I still make records that way though. It's funny. But yeah. It's the best way to make records. But yes. Yeah. I mean, it again, I think it's like a vibe that you get. Like, I hadn't listened to the record in quite some time, and you sent it to me, and I listened to the remaster, and it was like, wow, this is super cool, you know. And it does feel that way. Like it felt like I was listening to, you know, a band playing together. It wasn't like not a ton of like crazy overdubs, like not overproduced in any sort of way. Like just, you know, really great tight rhythm section, great guitar. You know, the harmonica was an awesome touch, and Tara sounded great. Like, it's neat to sort of hear it all these years later. But it did feel like it felt. I mean, I don't think we recorded it live, but it felt like we did.
Yeah.
I would say too, and I think this is, I mean, and I knowing everybody on this call pretty well, I think everybody would agree with this to some extent. I mean, like, categorization is kind of overrated at a level, right? Like there's aspects of music that we all love, and there's different things that come in, right? And like, so for example, like Mark and I are both huge Rush fans, and there's definitely elements of prog rock in some of the songs, but most people wouldn't necessarily go, that those guys sound like Yes or Rush. But we know it's there, and we can hear it. And if people go, if you say, hey, well, but that's an Alex Lifeson inspired guitar part, and they go, oh yeah, but they're not hearing it in the same context, because they're hearing a girl singing, and they're hearing a different kind of bass line, and they're hearing a different kind of song. So I think that's the thing too, that Blues Traveler and some of those kind of bands was a touch point for a lot of us, but I think Rush Point was a touch point for some of us too, and Pearl Jam was a touch point for a lot of us, and so and so we kind of, you know, and Springsteen, like Jeff and I are both, you know, Jeff especially is huge Springsteen fans, and it's like I can hear elements of that in there.
Really,
but most Springsteen fans probably wouldn't go, oh yeah, there's a Springsteen aspect to that, but I'm like, I know where it is, I can hear it in there.
I never would have picked you guys or pegged you guys with the Springsteen.
But no, we're both big Springsteen nerds. So I mean, but that's the thing, right? And so we all have these little, you know, sort of crossover, you know, Bare Naked Ladies too, right? Like you know, I knew those guys a bit, and we were very influenced by those guys. So I mean, there's all those swirling around things. So that I think that becomes what Uncle Seth is, and I think that's, you know, that's just kind of like you can try it, you know, drop us in the jam band slot or drop us in the roots rock slot or whatever, but you're pushing out of the slots, right?
Drew, so coming back to Drew, what did you mean by that when you said that?
So Jeff emails me the tracks, and I put them on yesterday morning, and I hadn't listened to it in 20 years. And I took a break after Uncle Seth, like sort of life got busy, and I stopped playing bass with other people for about 5 or 6 years. And then I sort of got back into jamming after my first kid was born. And so to like put this stuff on, and immediately you're sort of struck by the mix of influences, and some of it sounds sort of like late 90s rock, and with the female vocals you're sort of like, oh, there's a bit of like an Alanis element, there's a bit of a Sarah McLachlan element, there's a bit of sort of production value that was sort of very late 90s, early 2000s. And that genre of music like has sort of been eliminated, right? We don't, you know, and we can talk about how that's happened through amalgamation of like radio stations and like, you know, the oversigning of bands. Like there's lots of reasons why the music that we made you don't really hear anymore. You know, was sort of post grunge. It was poppy, but it was kind of heavy, and there were all these elements of like, I listened to it and I was like, okay, so you can hear the Rush, you can hear the Blues Traveler, you can hear the songwriting. And what struck me, and this is just my own personal thing, was like, I was like, oh my God, I sound like me. It's like a younger version of me that I hadn't listened to this, and I didn't like. It took me a while to sort of figure out, oh yeah, we recorded about 7 songs, and I sort of went through. But it was sort of frightening because at one point I was listening, I think it's called Cloud Song. Yeah. And so the pre-chorus, and so that like the bass starts going like, and I'm like, and I heard the first sort of refrain of the bass, and I was like, I know what I'm going to do next. Like, I know what's next. It was like me talking to me from the past, but I had it or something. It was the weirdest thing where I was like, I know what the next fill is. And of course that was the fill because it was me. And then in the second pre-chorus, I'm like, I know what I'm going to do now. Now I'm going to go up on the chromatic. And it was like from the past. It was crazy. So the whole thing, it was interesting to listen to. I think it held up a lot better. Like, we were young guys, you know, and it was a demo and we were sort of doing our best, and this wasn't our full-time thing, but I think it really held up, and it was, I was proud of it. Like, I really was. I listened to it, and I listened to it a bunch of times, and I played it for my brother yesterday. I didn't tell him what it was. He was like, "What is this?" He goes, "This sounds very 90s." And then he sort of heard me. He goes, "I know what this is."
Right.
It was that band, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, it was really neat to listen to and to hear all these elements. And I think really that what struck me was the maturity of the songwriting. Right? There was like a lot of cool stuff and a lot of divergent influences, and it all kind of sounded harmonious together. All of these sort of songs from different songwriters, and it all kind of blended really nicely. Do you guys agree?
I being the person who remastered it, I listened to us a lot in the last few months. Like on a microscopic level. And there are a lot of really fun things that I did to try and make small repairs or stuff, but none of the repairs, there was nothing wrong with the vibe. There was nothing wrong with the energy, and there was nothing wrong with everyone was just present. Right. And I can hear that right away too. Right. You just put it on and you're like, holy, like, it's a bunch of people trying to, and maybe it's because we were young, trying to do something great in a room. Right. And it was just awesome to hear.
I'm going to loop in because we haven't heard from Tara and Mark much yet. So I'm going to start dragging them in. So I'll start with Tara. We've talked a lot about the music and the vibe and the jam band aspect, the fact that there were the solos weren't long enough to go to the bathroom or whatever. What was your experience? Because the vocalist, and I'm not much of a vocalist, and people will probably be happy to hear that. But my sense is the vocalist has a different vantage point on the band because they're part of the music, but they're somewhat removed from the music. They kind of sit on top of the music. So what was your experience through this whole process of the recording, but also performing these songs?
So I think I had a really different perspective, as you said, being the singer, but also because I used to be the merch girl for the band. I wasn't the original singer for Uncle Seth.
The previous one spontaneously combusted or something, like little green globule.
No, she's just better than us. And
okay.
I can say that she's my best friend. But so she went off to university, and I was supposed to go to BC, and then I ended up auditioning for the band, and at the last minute. And anyways, so when those songs were presented, they weren't presented for me, like they weren't my songs for the most part. So trying to honor what was already set for these songs while trying to find my voice in them, I think was a real, and also like I would think I was like 20 or some stupid age. And so it was like, and also like all those insecurities are coming into play. So it was like a really difficult, honestly, recording. And I never really found like I found my place in it. Like I just felt like every song I was putting on a different character hat. And it wasn't till I pushed for little pieces to be on the album. And I pushed because I just wanted something that I felt was me, or had like my voice in it, or I had control of, that I started to, I guess, relax a bit. And to be honest, I hadn't listened to the album ever. Never.
This is good for Jeff. Jeff is thrilled. It's like, wow.
Until recently. No, and it's because of that. It's because when I hear parts of it, all I hear is how young I sound, how I sound like I'm trying to be somebody else or something. Couldn't hear it for what it was at the time. And now getting to hear it back now with like a little bit of, older, wiser perspective, hearing it and being like, I didn't suck as much as I thought.
I
all
want to make a
and all I could think in the whole time in the studio was these are such good songs and these are such good musicians, and I am not carrying my weight in this band. Like that's the whole like insecurity going through.
I want to make a small interjection because, and this is relevant to what you just said, which is the main reason that this is very hard to find. This album has been very hard to find online, is because I took it down because you wanted me to, because you were so insecure about it, and I didn't, I didn't want you to feel that way. And we had done more stuff later that you had been more involved in writing and conceiving, and you felt more confident about it. And I knew that I'm like, I'm just going to put this aside for now. And I actually kind of, I'll say this right now, I kind of feel vindicated at this moment, because I'm like, someday we'll get that back up. Yeah. I didn't know it took 20. I didn't know it took 20 years. But I'm like,
throw you guys under the bus.
So no, but someday we're gonna yeah, very often. Someday we're gonna sneak this thing back on, and you're gonna feel good about it. And I think that day has arrived. So I
don't know if I feel good about it. No. As me, I can't feel good about anything. But
well,
I don't hate it as much.
Okay.
So I will.
I'll take
and
it.
for me, that is big praise.
Knowing you as long as I've known you, I'll take it. I'll absolutely.
So Tara.
Yeah.
How much of it was, because I'm looking around the room here, and there's 5 guys in the band and me, and you were a young woman at the time. You're still a young woman, of course, but at the time you were a younger woman. How much of it was the fact that you were singing songs written by men from a male perspective, and they're not necessarily male theme songs, but they're a male voice song?
Sometimes they were very male theme songs. I mean, there was what song was it? That was written about the person I was engaged to. It was their ex-girlfriend. It was written about, who was Jeff's ex-girlfriend.
My first girlfriend ever.
This is starting to sound like Fleetwood Mac.
So it's like, it was like this moment of like, I'm singing this song about this girl who
the other problem is
I hate for some reason.
There's a lot of that kind of nonsense.
So like, it was, there was like that layer to it. But I don't know, like I grew up in a house of boys. Like I have 2 older brothers that basically raised me. And my, I played in all boys hockey leagues. I was a tomboy. So like I am most comfortable in a room full of men. In a room full of women, I have a panic attack in my head. So that part didn't bother. I didn't feel like I couldn't say what I wanted to say. I didn't feel like I couldn't tell them off. I didn't feel like there was nothing like that. But I think it was my own, like, I didn't know where I fit yet in the band, because I didn't feel like I contributed anything. Like, so I think that was the biggest challenge for me.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think we probably all agree that that's insane. But I mean, like
my doctor would too.
Your voice, literally the voice of Uncle Seth. But I hear you. I can't wait to hear from Mark.
Yeah. So Mark, what was your perspective? I mean, you've been very quiet so far, taking this all in, taking notes, no doubt. So what was your perspective of being in this, with this album and how this project evolved, and removing yourself from the music a bit to understand how it all fit together?
It's funny, I've been listening and mostly trying to remember kind of what was going on back then. And so 20 years ago, I think during the recording of this album, I turned 20. I think at the time I was going to Humber for jazz and was more concerned about good chops and cool grooves than musicality when I listened back. But it's funny. So when Jones sent me the remaster and I listened to it the first time, I enjoyed it. And then every time after, I started picking it apart for my parts anyways, which was kind of funny. And for me, the big thing was, I said, like, these are a lot of like neat songs and good songs. And I wish I had done more Tom Petty than Rush for the if I could do it again, that's what I would do. But yeah, it was neat. And it's kind of funny that you go back and listen to this stuff. And I listened to it again last night after a bunch of times, and I enjoyed it again. And it's funny, you when Tara said, was it Little Pieces? The two Little songs, Little Pieces and Little Steps, are my absolute two favorite songs from the album. Because I think they're the best written, and because there's no drums.
I was gonna say there's no drums.
So
you do play on Little Steps.
You played guitar on Little Steps.
So you said something really interesting, which is more Tom Petty and less Rush. So what was it that you did? Is it that you tried to make the drums part of the song versus support the song? Like how would you create that distinction?
Yeah, I think I was trying to create a groove that didn't necessarily fit the song, but sounded good and was good with the bass and stuff. And I think like I listened back and like me and Drew were grooving, and some of the stuff it worked really well, but just some of the stuff I went back and said, man, if I just got out of the way here and just put it in the pocket, then this would be better. But that's just me being hypercritical of my parts of it, right? Like the more I listen to it now, the better it gets for me. And I mean, I can definitely hear on some of the stuff. I'm like, I definitely had influence on that song. I don't know that I did, but I'm pretty sure I did, because it sounds like something I would do. But yeah, I mean, like overall, I thought like it was groovy and tight without being just over rehearsed and without emotion or life kind of thing like that. But a little bit of looseness too that was kind of nice. And yeah, you go back and listen to this stuff 20 years later, and it's just surreal because I think like Drew and Tara, I hadn't listened to it in 20 years. So to sit there and do it, it was a bit of a wild trip. And I was sitting there again last night, just sitting in front of my stereo, listening to this thing and going like wow, just the memories coming back of going down to Brian's studio at night, driving home on River Street there, like trying not to hit that corner bend and wreck your car, right? And like those are the things I remember from back then, right? And it was just, I mean, it was a neat time. It was kind of fun to sort of remember that because I hadn't, right? So, and that was kind of my experience with it. I mean, like it was fun. It was a ton of fun. There's a lot of good songs, and I've got a few favorite kind of thing like that. And personally, yeah, I like it, but if I went back, I would get out of the way more. Like if I could that's what I would do.
But if you did that, maybe it wouldn't be the same. Well, definitely wouldn't be the same, but maybe it wouldn't be what everyone, has been digging about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
So since Brian is piped up now, this is the danger of if you seek, you become a target for the next question. What would you do if you were producing this album today? If this group of people came forward with these songs to you today,
rehearsed,
and they're demoed as opposed to having recorded the way they were, what would you do differently now? Like what would Lame Suburban Poetry sound like in 2022 if it was a new album?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I would have. Most certainly, because I've been doing this a lot lately, is I would have had them all in a room together playing. I'm fairly certain. I mean, based on the studio that we recorded this in, that was not the case necessarily. But I would definitely, get them in a bigger room and have them play and feed off of each other. I think that, at least for the bed tracks. So I think that would have some influence on it. But it's sort of weird. Like I don't know. I always think of records. And I've been making them for a while now. They're like a slice of history. It's like a slice of time. And you could go make the same record 20 years later, but it'll be completely different. Everyone's grown and changed, and, the musicianship is different, but there's like almost an innocence to the way it was made. And even from me, like it was very early on in my career. Certainly from a mixing perspective, after listening to it, there are some things I probably want to do different. Like, I don't know what we were thinking about the reverb on the vocal seems a little dated to me, but again, it was the time too. Like we had just come out of the 90s and like, that was a thing. There was some like, even on the snare drum, there was like a lot of like, it's kind of like a nice wet snare drum sound, which I would definitely not do these days, but again,
I probably asked for that though. That's the thing, right?
Cover up that snare with some reverb.
I probably said like, give me User Illusion 2, and you were like, okay, let's hold it back, right? Like,
chill.
If you start changing these things, then it's not the record that we know. you know, and it's like
Yeah.
and maybe that's, you know, I don't know, it's not meant to be changed in a way, you know. Although Jeff, I thought the remaster sounded great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We should acknowledge what a like a stellar job you did with that remaster, man. It sounds really good.
Well,
Like,
that's really kind. I was also going to say though, what's interesting too is when you consider the fidelity of the kind of gear that you can work with now, Brian, like top-notch professional gear, and you consider where it was recorded and what we did. The other thing that I found really weird is that like moving through a life with all that gear, like I remastered this entirely on a brand new MacBook Air.
Right.
Wow. How many gigs of memory?
And you know what I mean? Like with a very cool simulated room setup so I could hear it properly. But you know, like that's what's possible now versus, you know, having to cobble it together like we did. Because
did we do it? Did we do it? Like, you'll have to refresh my.
It was
DA88.
Like, it was DA88. It was DA88s, and in fact, there was a whole thing, Brian. And I'll remind you now because we had a little nightmare, and Jeff and I got into a fight over it, and we had a whole thing. And at one point, your DA88 was eating one of the tracks. Do you remember that? We were in the studio and we kept hearing clicks coming out because it was like I don't know what was happening. And we had to stop recording, stop listening. And Jeff wanted to keep listening. And I'm like, no, we can't keep listening. It's killing the tape. Like, we actually got into a big argument about it. And because we had kind of come to the conclusion that playing it back was what was causing the errors. But that was the stuff at the time. And that was really new. So DA88, I'll say this for the benefit of folks who are listening and anyone who doesn't know, is sort of first generation digital multi-track that was recorded on, what were they? They were like SVHS.
i8. No,
they were i8.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, and I might be guessing,
digital, right?
I might be guessing here, but I imagine you guys used a master and slave thing. And my experience with ADATs and that kind of technology is sometimes the slave would just desync from the master, and you have to wait for 2 hours for the two of them to sync up again.
I remember the D88s actually being better in that regard. Like, so that specific problem was rarely a problem, but we did have this weird problem where all of a sudden, like, it would just decide it was going to like put a pop on the middle of the track because something weird happened. So that might have been the damage. It was anyway
24 tracks. Like, I remember I had like one D88 and two DA38s. So there was 24 tracks.
You had a master slave thing that was working.
Yeah, so, and then did we? And I've been trying to remember this. Did we record it on my Mackie console, or did I have that Neotech console by that time?
No. I think it was the Mackie.
I think it was a Mackie.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was before the Neotech.
So this is when I was, and then for those who don't know,
we got photos. We can figure it out.
Console, right? And you were always trying to upgrade your gear, which is great. But the thing that struck me, again, having listened to this for hours, right, the way we did it, and no outboard processing, like the original mixes with no what you would call mix bus processing with compressors, and the sounds are so rich. Like, no wonder you're still doing this, because your ears are like, your taste and ears are amazing, because like I couldn't believe the richness of the sounds that we were getting and remembering how we recorded it, right? And I have a couple of vivid memories. See, we weren't live in the same room, but I have the memory of, obviously, the room you had, the drums are set up. I know I played live. I may have done overdubs afterwards in the control room, and I think Drew did too.
Yeah,
and we must have had Tara singing along for a guide.
Yeah, in the control room. Yeah,
for sure.
No,
and when we did bed tracks, no. When we did bed tracks, Mark was in the control room. It was in the booth, and all of us were in the control. Everyone was in the control room.
Well, we threw out almost everything except the drums, and usually Drew's parts. But sometimes you went back and punched in and did stuff, because we have a video of you punching in some stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and I also remembered vividly when we were geeking out about what kind of compression to put in front of.
I remember this.
Like, so we were going to like compressor pedals and crap. And I don't know.
We spent a long time on thinking about compression.
With Drew's bass, like we were talking about, like, because obviously the Mackie wasn't doing it for you. So, like,
no.
But the tone, the tone, like,
it's pretty good. It's pretty damn good.
Like, it's pretty good. Like, honestly, and in that,
it is.
and again, like I don't think I could play it like if we had to play the gig, like it would take me 6 months to rehearse. Like I don't think I could play bass like that anymore. It's just different now. But like it was definitely, you know, the bass was like a little hot and the I'm not sure that the like it was like rock bass tone. Like it sounds really good. There's a little grind to it. Like you can definitely hear the like Geddy Lee and John Entwistle in there a bit.
I want to make a like a overarching comment of the last couple of things because everybody, and I think I had this experience too when I listened to it, which is, oh, you know, sounds cool, but I mean, I really wish I had played less there or played better there, or you know, like there's all kinds of things that I would do differently now, and I think we all have that experience to some extent. But I think given the chops and ears and capabilities and everything that we had that came together there, like it sounds really good. And I think like Tara, I can hear where you might hear that your voice sounds too young or sounds too like underdeveloped or whatever because of what I knew you could do later. But there's like a cool charm to it, and there's a nice like there's a something really sweet about a lot of it, and you know, Mark, like the stuff you're doing, like there's stuff where it's like, you know, maybe you think you listen now and like I'm overplaying, but it's like, yeah, but you're going for it, right? Like you can hear there's an energy, like, and there is an energy to a lot of those tracks too, even when there's a groove, like even like something like Skylight, which we ended up slowing down and making groovy, but there's still a forward motion to it, even in the like there's a weird kind of, it's laid back, but it's still got push, and that's hard to do. And I mean, you know, these days I play with a lot of old guys and they've got great feel. And the problem now sometimes is like waking everybody up to, you know, get the energy going. So, you know, you're spending your whole life trying to find that balance. Right. And I think, you know, that was a moment where you know, it was probably energy over, you know, laid back grooviness, but I think there's something to that, and there's a charm and a coolness to that. And it's the same way when I listen to some of my favorite bands and I listen to their first records. And we were talking about like old Genesis records the other day. If you listen to like the first couple of Genesis records, they sound like crap compared to how they played later because they got really, really good as players. But if you listen to like The Knife, which is like the second Genesis album, there's like a real aggressive sort of coolness to it. And that was just, you know, that's just one crazy example. But there's that to me. There's like I can hear where they're going with this. I can hear what's going to happen with this. And some of it did, and then some of it was, you know, we didn't get around to. But maybe we still will. Who knows? But I hear all of that when I hear it. I hear like there's a young band, but there's a band that has, you know, some things going for it and is going to go some places.
Can I ask Mark?
So, you know, maybe just down the street, but some places.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Do you remember? I mean, we didn't play to a click, but did we set tempos and did you like take a tempo before we started? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think
there was a click and there was set tempos for everything.
Yeah. Because
it was part. Mark had it written down for everything.
But we adjusted some because, like for instance, Skylight, we actually tried it at the tempo we had rehearsed it at, and we're like, it's not working. So we backed it off a little bit. And I don't remember specifically if we just played to a slower click or if we just said let's just go for it. But there's a few tunes where we decided we were going to do one thing and then did something else in the studio for sure.
I think I was listening to it yesterday, and I think it's If I Laugh, you can actually hear the click, like very faintly in the background.
That's right.
Okay, so
the remaster.
I was like, yeah, okay, that's a click track, yeah.
So that must be because I didn't learn how to play to a click track till about 10 years after we recorded this record. So that it must have been in your ear and not with us.
It was in his headphones, and it kept bleeding into the mics. And there was a big freak out about it because Mark spent like half a day. Yes. He hired someone to come in to tune the drums.
That's right,
and get the drum sound. We were like half a day in the studio to get the drum sound. And I remember just being like, "Kill me."
He's credited on the album, Groove Technician. But he made the drums sound really sweet. He spent like a long time, but it sounded way better after that.
So I want to jump in on a couple things that have come up.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry,
Blevis.
we got half an hour left in this scheduled program, and I want to make sure I tackle a few things. A few things have
By
come
the way,
up.
I only
So
put this. I mean, we're not like beholden to.
yeah, no, but we're also in our 50s now, right? So it's like
It's over my
talking like,
bedtime.
oh my God.
I'm not 50. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Some of us are definitely.
Tara's 20 still. So
Some of
so
you, yes.
it's come up a few times about, Tara brought it up, and Jay, you brought it up. I think a few people brought up Tara's vocals, and one of the things that strikes me about Tara's vocals is they're kind of like, and I'm not sure how this comparison is going to, but with Paul McCartney, he's going to never know the note, and he hit. And listening to the album a few times in the last week, and there's notes that Tara just pulls out of the air, and as she's going for it, just before the note comes, you're like, oh, I think she's going to try and hit this, and then you're like, oh, she got it, and it's not a knock that you're not capable of doing it. It's a vocal style that I think is pretty. It's pretty interesting, because I think Paul McCartney has it. I think Alanis, to a certain extent, has it. Or you're not sure if she's going to hit this note, and then she pulls this note into the production. What role, in the overall musicality of this did the vocal lines, but also the vocal part, the singing, actually play into these songs? And that's for anybody to answer. I know I'm picking on Tara, but it's a
No,
for
again,
people that heard it as opposed to Tara.
a lot of these melodies were established prior to me, and they were established by someone who had a higher range than I did. So I think sometimes when you hear me reaching for those notes, it's because I'm friggin' reaching for those notes. And I learned recently about the use of autotune on the album, which was not endorsed and or condoned by me.
It was
But
literally
I'm very
on one
thankful
note.
it was used.
It was literally on one note.
Okay, so we could tell that. Okay, first
You
of
want
all,
to tell the story? Tell that story, but I want to come back to that comment. But tell the story first, because
first of all, we did change key for a couple songs, but I think you were reluctant to go too far from the original key, because you had, at the time, an exaggerated sense of respect for the previous singer, and she may have earned that because she's a great singer now, but but we did use autotune on the record, but we didn't do it globally at all. In fact,
we did it on one note.
Yeah, changing things would be, and it's not any of the places you think it would be. There's the song Gentle Shove of Fate. The chorus starts with a long held note that is the fifth note of the chord. And I had no idea about it at the time. Two things about it. That note happened to sit right near Tara's break, between chest voice and head voice, which is like a singer thing. But it's also like making the five note in a moving chord sound smooth is actually kind of difficult. Right. And so it would just waver a little bit. And because it was so naked, we went out to Long McQuaid and rented an analog auto-tune box. And when Tara didn't know about it, and we sat into the studio with Brian and just went over it, and just like nudged it back.
And we swore everyone's secrecy. I still have the little piece of paper with everyone's blood on it.
I literally just found out.
That's hilarious.
That's really funny.
And they debated even telling me. They're like, "Well, no,
no,
okay.
we were never going to tell you.
No,
we were never going to tell you.
Yeah.
But it was only because of that. But I actually want to say something, like, just again, sort of general about that, is that I think one of the things to me that's really charming when I go back and listen to it, because Jen's a fantastic singer. She was a fantastic singer. She is a fantastic singer, and she's a good friend of a lot of ours, and yours especially, Tara. But I did, one of the things that I liked about your treatment of a lot of the songs, and the best example of this for me is the song "Release Yourself," is that when Jen sang that, it was very kind of operatic, and and this is a great example where, so Mark and I wrote that song, and it's the closest to a thing to being a prog rock song on it, because leave the two Rush nerds in a room alone, and that's what happens. And then when Jen sang it, it had this kind of operatic quality that sort of pushed more in that direction. But when you sang it, it had this much more organic, folky kind of thing, and especially when you added your harmony that you came up with later, and it's like, oh my God, you made our like nerdy prog rock song kind of cool and down to earth somehow. and I don't know how you did that, but that's one of the things that I really
like.
like.
A lot saying that, like that honestly, and I mean that like truly.
No,
that
and
means
I
a lot
always
to
felt
say
that.
that because I felt totally mocked in the studio because all y'all kept saying, "Release yourself."
No. Well, we weren't mocking you. We were mocking the song, right? We were mocking our own writing.
And every time I was like, "Am I saying it like that?"
No. We were.
And then we
Actually,
would say other things
if
too.
we
We'd
were
be like,
mocking anyone, we were
"Unleash yourself," or
probably
like-
making fun of the way that Jen would have done
Every
it.
time,
But
release. I just remember like being like, "Oh my god."
and the other thing that's interesting, actually, that song, and I think this is true with Cross too, is the other thing that was sort of funny that happened in the writing process, and this was actually so I was thinking about this. This is sort of a reverse influence thing, where those little fast parts that I ended up singing on those two songs, I only ended up singing them because Jen couldn't sing that fast, and I think if you had been in the band earlier, you would have sung those parts because you can sing much faster than her. So I think actually in that respect, there is a sort of a funny influence that she had on the record in that way that I adapted those songs against her weaknesses, but then they turned out being your strengths because later on your stuff like Civic, which is just as fast, if not faster, in a lot of places, or a lot of your songs are actually you write faster lyrical parts a lot of times than I do, or Jeff does. So there's those kinds of influences that were still happening on the record from the previous singer and from her. And none of this, for anyone who's listening, is to belittle Jen Key, who's an amazing singer and a good friend of all of ours. So
I think she's probably the only person that we all know, except for Brian, because Brian probably knows people who's sung on stage at Red Rocks. Like, I mean, she's an amazing singer, right? Like, that's
for sure. She's fantastic.
But the thing I wanted to add is there's actually only one place on the record where maybe Tara didn't quite hit the note she wanted to hit. And the only reason, and that I would say that there's a moment for pull back the curtain for those who might be listening, is in Funny Faces. And I think you developed a lot of angst about that song, I think because you like the song so much.
I love the song. And I got yelled at by Brian. Well, I didn't get yelled at. I got sternly looked at with an angry look that in my head was yelling.
I wouldn't yell. I don't yell.
Because No, because I was really disrespectful and I couldn't get a note and I threw the headphones on the ground. And you gave me a look of like, I don't know who you think you are, little girl. I was like, I picked them up and I apologized.
Right. So, I mean, I did, interestingly, if you go back and I don't know why anyone would do this, if you actually have a physical copy of the CD, and you listen to them.
Is that your little marketing moment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't find these anywhere. It's still in the rack.
It's actually on eBay.
But if you were to compare the original mix to, there's a moment where I used like this crazy sort of AI technology to pull that part out and tune it a little bit. So the one part, like I didn't want to change it, so I didn't like try and beautify it or anything. But there's a moment where, and I didn't, when you listen back to it, I remember you even said, "Oh, that's not as bad as I thought it was." And my mind is like, no, it's not. but also,
sneaky.
That song stuck out because it always we try to even change the part and you refuse to sing it differently because you like the song so much, which I think speaks to the sort of songwriting vibe of the band and how the songwriting kind of took over the band as the band moved forward and how important the song was. I mean, we probably should have just changed the key, and I have no idea for the life of me why we wouldn't do that.
We tried and it didn't sound right, and I think that one thing. Like the songs are so I have such respect for each of the songs as they were, but also I'm fine reinterpreting your guys' songs. You know that I've like torn apart your songs. I've thrown away lyrics from your songs and things like that. Both Jay and Jeff. But when something feels right to me and feels like that, no, it's meant to be like this, I can't change it. I can't get it out of my head that this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of questions I'd have about songwriting. I feel like that we should make an 8-hour marathon of this. But I think that there's something more interesting that's come out of this conversation. And I'll start off with Drew on this one. I'll go on the room. So Drew gets the disadvantage of having to answer first, and everybody else has the opportunity to make up their own answers for this. You know, it's 20 years out since this album came out. You've already noted that you weren't in the for very long, 5 months. Obviously did some shows, you were involved in the album. Is there anything that strikes you from this album as having changed you? Is there anything from this experience or from the recording, songwriting that, if you reflect, it's like, oh yeah, that's still, I do this to this day, or it made me do something different to this day?
So again, like I hadn't listened to the record in a long time. And so what was interesting was like I took a break from playing bass after this. Like school got busy and then sort of professional life and family life started. And then when the next band that I played with, and I jammed with them for a decade, the drummer was very weak. And what it necessitated was me really simplifying, like laying down the bass, like just really simplifying everything. And so it's interesting that what this record didn't change the way that I play, but this record, what was so nice to revisit it was sort of like it was the last version of that, of me playing bass in that way, right? And like, so my bands through high school, my bands through university, even my bands through dental school, I played bass in a certain way. And this sort of was the culmination of that. I was playing with a great drummer, and it was like, and my playing changed after that. So to go back and listen to it, it's not that the playing, this experience didn't change me. It was nice to sort of have this as documentation of how it used to be. And it was my subsequent experience musically that changed. So it was really neat to go back and listen and say, oh, I used to just like rip it. Like that was cool.
Yeah, there's some pretty interesting, as a bass player, there were some songs, particularly with Skylight and what else do I have here? I think Skylight, Release Yourself, that kind of had bass parts in there that really stuck out for me. I gotta throw this
up for that musician too. I remember Drew getting really excited with the bass part he was putting together for Destin, the first tune on the record. He had a whole thing. Sound like the Eagles. I like the breakdown in Life in the Fast Lane. I remember that was with your.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were directing us at one point. You're like, okay, you don't play so much there, and you play something different there. Like you were actually like,
it was. That's what it was. It was the break from Life in the Fast Lane. That's what
I remember that very well.
Oh, I have to listen to that song again now.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, Mark, same question for you. What's changed for you as a result of this experience, this album?
Oh, I had all this time to think about it, and I got nothing good to say. But I think the biggest thing for me with that is I know I was so young back then, and I don't think it was my first time doing like a recording studio thing, but it was one of the first few times. And as much as you go back and listen to yourself and are hypercritical and pick apart every little missed note and grace note and that shouldn't have been that or should have been a different fill, for me that kind of, it gave me, at that point in my life, I said, oh, I could do this. I can record stuff and it doesn't completely suck. And I think after that, it kind of gave me an opportunity to work on some other projects. I know I worked on a few things with Brian over the few years after that. And it was really cool. So I think for me, it was like a kind of like the stepping stone to a lot of things there, but it was kind of the beginning of it. And when you go back to that, like now that you put it in perspective, and really, I haven't really thought about this for probably 20 years. You go back and think about it and go, like, yeah, that was kind of the start of it for me for a lot of the stuff I did in music. And like Drew, life got busy and professional and everything else and family and the same way, like I had to go back now and play those hearts, I would need at least 6 months to to get there, right? Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it. It was just it was kind of like that stepping stone to say, okay, yeah, we can do this and I can do this, and it led to some neat things, and overall, I mean, having gone back and listened to it, it's like something to be proud of, right?
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, that's interesting for me. I think that there are a couple things. I mean, this experience was the experience of this record through to my end of the time of the band was extremely formative. But much like Drew, I think it had a bigger effect on me the way I changed and grew afterwards. But what was really important for me on it is there are two songs on this record where I think I've been trying to write songs at this point. At the time of this record, I'd probably been trying to write songs for about 10 years, right? Like trying to, like, dating back to like being in high school and trying to, like, when I knew 3 chords on guitar, I would started to try and write songs, right? And 2 songs that were written just before the band started are on the record, and that's If I Laugh and Little Steps. And those were the first songs that I sort of finished and was like, oh crap, those are songs. You know, like it was this moment of like, oh, that's a real thing. I think if you talk to a lot of songwriters, you'll find that there's a difference between the songs you kind of barf out and the songs you're like, oh crap, that's a real whole thing. Like that's done now. I got that. And I've been playing If I Laugh in different variations since the band for now. I've probably played the song for 23 years in different places. And if I ever play a solo show, I play it and I gravel voice my way through it and we do all that. And the people who have seen me many times always want to hear it. But for me, this point is the first time I had that experience of, oh crap, I was able to finish a thing. And then stepping in the studio and getting to record it with the band and great singers and everyone working really hard on it, and Brian putting his ears to it, and then we all manually mixed it, right? And if you don't know, if you've never experienced that, that's like how it was done in the 70s, where you would literally be manually moving faders during the mix, right? Like you had 5 people playing the board, and it just had this feeling of like, wow, I wrote this song, but to get it finished, it's a collaborative experience. Like it has to go through many jobs and many hands, and it really helped shape the way I think about not just music, but creative products and creative just creation in general, which is, trusting collaborators and going to collaborators, not trying to mold what collaborators do very much, and, when Jay brings up the fights we had about stuff, I'm always embarrassed because
me too.
it would have just been better if I had let anyone just do their thing. Because, you have the bedrock of the song and then everyone's trying to serve the song and it ends up being something. And it's always better than when you clamp down and say, no, it should be this. It should be this. It's always better when you just go, oh, what do you think? What do you want to add? Hey, what if we did this thing in the break? Oh, cool. Let's try that. Or so let's break. Yeah, you guys heard of Life in Fast Lane? Like, whatever that kind of stuff starts happening, it always turns out better. And I really learned that from this era in the band. And by the time we got to the end of the band, we're writing songs like To Be an Angel collaboratively. And yeah, it turns out beautifully. And more as I moved on, even as I did do a lot of work in theater, it's the same thing. As a theater director, I would literally just be like, no, you guys go. I'll tell you when it sucks. Like that's kind of, anyway, I learned that from this experience about going on too far. Like the idea of collaboration, and you start with a good thing and then you let everyone kind of run with it.
Okay.
A lot of what Jeff just said rings really true for me, so I won't try not to repeat too much. But I do feel like it was the first time I'd done some recording things. Jeff and I had some bands before, and I'd done some other things with various people as a sideman and other things. This was the kind of first record that I made, and conceptualizing something like, how are we going to take these kind of disparate songs and pieces that different people had written and different people had put their spin on these little pieces. Yeah. Funny enough, it's funny how often I use that phrase because it is sort of how I conceptualize things. It's just like, how do we fit all this stuff together? And that, I think one of the reason that song rings true is because it's so much about philosophy and how I think about life. It's like, how do we take all this stuff and make it into something cool? Which is something that I think was really a big part of, along with everything Jeff said about trying to let people, contribute and listen and bring ideas. It was also that idea of kind of going, we're gonna put this song after that song, and at some point Jeff said, hey, why don't we do some little instrumental things and oh, that's cool, and making a bigger thing, something that's bigger than the sum of its parts, right? And so I think that's one of the things that for me was, that I still sort of, when I'm making records now or trying to do set lists now or whatever it is, I try and think, what's the arc of this thing? You know, how's this, you know, not just a bunch of individual songs or individual moments, but how is it a story in itself, right? With a lot of little stories inside of it. And I feel like that was one of the things that we, you know, I don't know if we were 100% successful, but I feel like we were definitely, that's where we were going. And I could still hear that we were like trying to make something with a shape, you know, and that's one of the cool things about trying to make records. And the other thing, and I sort of lumped this in a little bit with some of the other things that we did with Brian, but working with, like, I'd never really worked with a real producer before. I'd done stuff, you know, on my own with a guy who was like a tape op kind of guy, and having Brian as a guy who would say, you know, have you thought about this and thought about that? And that probably happened more later. I think that was probably, you know, and I think if there was something we might have done differently on this is we might have let Brian get more involved in kind of pre-production, because we did that a little more later on when we worked with Brian, and it always made things better. And it all, like it's hard to be your own editor, right? So that's another thing that I kind of learned, is that there's almost always a moment for somebody to listen to your stuff and go, you know, that thing, maybe not so much of that thing, or maybe move that thing over here, right? And I know when we were doing To Be an Angel, which was a tune we recorded later on with Brian in a different lineup, I remember very specifically there was some up and down things in the bridge, and Brian said, why don't you switch that part and do that part here? And we were all like, oh, yeah.
Well,
so that was a bit of a revelation. And I mean, that's more later, you know, and again, I kind of lump it into working specifically with Brian, but I think that was the other thing is there's a moment where somebody else can come in and go, you know.
And you know, it really is the fingerprint. Sorry for jumping in, guys, but the fingerprint of trying to make it a whole thing is actually all subtly, but all over the record. Like, you know, I listen back to those 4 little solo things that we do. That's the waltzes, as they're called. And I don't, to this day, I don't know. I didn't do one with the bass, but I have no idea why that was. You might have been in class. I don't know, but like there's
Drew was kind of gone after we did the best. I think that was the main reason.
So the idea that there's these little snippets of our personality on our instrument just buried in the record. I don't remember us coming up with it, but I think it's really, really cool. And I also think if you listen to the sort of last track, Last Laugh, you can hear the very end of it. You can hear the harmonica part from Cloud Song, because I think the idea initially was to have Cloud Song open the record, and so that you could theoretically play it on an infinite loop. Like the idea that the song ends.
That was exactly the idea.
Yeah. So I think that was
that was. And I know where I got that. That was my idea, and I know where I got that idea from, because you can do that with the wall. The end of the wall goes into the beginning of the wall, so you can play it forever in a loop. And I said, let's do that.
Really nerdy in there.
But again, that's an idea where it's just like you know, you steal somebody else's idea, or you make it your own, and then it becomes something different, right? But that was exactly where that idea came from.
Brian, you can tell Ezra that he inspired like Jay Muna.
This is true.
Inspired me, like you could tell him. You could have told him that at any time, any given day.
So Brian, over to you with that 20-year question. What has changed for you since this record?
Nothing, not much.
It's interesting, you know, as a young producer, I bet it's probably one of the first full-length records I ever made. So it's, I mean, so much has changed, you know, since making this record. But, you know, I would have learned a ton when I made the record. It was also, I mean, you know, I'm very close with my cousin Drew. So to get to work with Drew on that level, you know, bringing him in to play bass was awesome. You know, it was a fun opportunity, which was cool. And, you know, to work with my teaching assistant, that was always, it's always fun. Yeah. But I mean, I think really it was probably the last time, or one of the last times, I made a record in that sort of old fashioned way where, you know, we were on a mixing board and using digital tape, and you know, I would have brought in Pro Tools shortly after. And that would have changed everything, you know, like you know, Jeff, you talking about how collaborative it was making a record, like really had to be collaborative. You know, it was all hands on deck all the time. We were all together making records, and sadly records don't always get made that way these days, you know, especially in my world. You know, I spend a lot of time alone in a room by myself, making, you know, mixing music, and you know, I listen to the record you know, when Jeff sent it to me, and it was like, wow, this is, you could hear sort of like how much fun we had making the record, you know, and it was there, like, it's hard for me to remember. I've made a lot of records since this record, so it's hard for me to remember like certain specifics, but you could hear the, you know, all the collaboration and you know, the fun and you know, the good times that went into making the record. And it, like, I think that holds up over the years. But it's interesting too, because I still make records in the same way. You know, when I'm working with a band, like I get people playing together, you know, and I'm sure that having this experience and how the record turned out, you know, had sort of informed a lot of my decision making for years to come, which, you know, is the same, you know, it's the same. Like, I bet if we all got into a room 20 years later and made, you know, did a recording again, that would be very similar. It's just, you know, after
You're getting
20
ahead of
years
me.
in,
Don't start giving away my questions.
well, we would just, you know, I think it would be, I think we'd find ourselves in a similar situation and how we would make it. Sure, the tools have changed, and you know, I think, you know, we've all grown as musicians, and I've grown as a producer and a mixer, but you know, so things would be different, but I think the nuts and bolts of it would be very similar. So I guess in some ways a lot's changed, and in other ways not so much has changed.
What about you, Tara?
What was the question?
I know they're talking of
Um,
what has changed for you in 20 years? How did this album in particular, what impact did it have on you? What's changed for you? The other guys kind of like took license with the question, but
Well, I think it's, I don't know, it's come at a really interesting time, like this whole revisiting this album 20 years later. I mean, like, I'm on the cusp of the 15th anniversary of my 25th birthday, and I feel like it's very much like has me in like the reflective mindset already. So having to look back and like actually listen to something I did is interesting. And also I think I really hear me figuring out who I am and how I fit. And I think that's like, and getting that confidence to do the next thing. Like it feels very finding my place. And I think I sort of found it in that album, in parts. And also getting confidence as a writer, like what's it called on the album? Double?
Yeah.
Double, which later on became Bits on Tim, which is became a song, but it became like this. I could actually write something, and someone actually thought it was worthy of putting on something, and so it kind of gave me that confidence that maybe everything I do doesn't suck, and kind of like help me move forward as like, I guess, as an artist. And also, I mean, Little Pieces, Jay knows is my obsession, and that song meant so much to me that later, like when I started to launch a solo career, that's the first single I put out was a rearrangement of Little Pieces, with piano and like violins and cello and overproduced,
Which is
thing.
still, by the way, when people say what's the greatest compliment you ever received, I said it's when my friend Tara re-recorded a song that I wrote. Like,
yeah.
But
I always say that.
I also have it tattooed on my back.
And that's
So-
the other, and that as well. Those are the two. Those are the two. Like, whenever anyone says what's the greatest compliment you ever received, those are the things that I always say.
Burned your
Yeah.
writing into her body.
Yeah, like his writing is literally on my back.
Blows me. That still
People
blows me
read
away
it every
time I
day
think
when I'm standing in line for something. They're like,
blows me away.
when I was a girl, I didn't much. Like, don't go yet.
There's more. It's a long quote too.
Yeah. But I think like that. I mean, it meant so much to me because it was the beginning. It was like the beginning of me as a singer. I feel like I've sung my whole life since I was a kid, but as an actual like artist, I think that was the momentum. Yeah, the safe place.
So we started 15 minutes late, so I'm going to steal another 15 minutes from you guys just to make the hour and a half round out.
I don't think we're on a set time limit.
A bunch of rapid fire questions I have for you, which I know might be difficult for Jay, maybe others, but I want to get to those. and I want to do a bit of a close. I want to do the rapid fire questions, but before that, I want to take a couple minutes. I know this could easily go for an hour, but I want to at least bring up Matt Osborne, and talk a bit about his contributions to the album. I know he's near and dear to the band. I know that people who like Uncle Seth, would be hard for them not to learn much about Matt Osborne, because among other things, Jay was a vocal champion of Matt and his music. So why don't we're at 9:59 according to my clock. At 10:05, let's wrap up the Matt Osborne case. I know that's tough, but let's see what we do here. So who wants to open with something about Matt?
Well, why don't I give the context of who he is, and maybe Tara and Jeff talk about how he contributed, particularly
That's
on this
what I was
record,
hoping for.
just in general. So Matt Osborne is a gentleman who grew up in our hometown of Scarborough, but actually I got to know first, maybe Jeff around the same time, when he was at Wilfrid Laurier in Laurier with in Kitchener with some of my friends and Jeff's friends that we grew up with, and he was just a fantastic singer, guitarist, harmonica player, songwriter. Basically, any instrument he picked up, he could play better than just about anybody you'd meet. And on top of that, just one of the nicest, sweetest, most genuine people you could possibly imagine. And he was a good friend of ours. We played with him right from the very first Uncle Seth gig. He opened for us, which was, he often opened for us, which I always felt was sort of like,
ridiculous.
Like, yeah, it was ridiculous, but he would always do it. And he would come and play with us and hang out with us and play in a church basement. I think, Tara, that's probably where you met him when he used to do those basement gigs. And he was just this fantastic person. And he very sadly passed away suddenly at the age of 31. Not too terribly long after we did this. I guess 2004.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of years after we did this, and in fact, yeah, probably just before we were going to record the next EP. So I don't know which of you guys want to say in terms of how he contributed to the band. Maybe Jeff, you can talk about his relationship with the band, and maybe Terry, if you want to talk about getting him in on this.
Sure. Well, first of all, just to also add to what Jay said, he wasn't just good at his instruments. Watching him play was like watching fire. Like you had to understand, and it's really. And listening to the records that exist, and Matt Osborne, MattOsborne, if anyone wants to check him out, his records are fantastic. His songwriting is great. There's a couple, you get a sense of his live vibe and a couple of the things he's done, but it was usually just him and an 11-string guitar, because he would take the high G off, and he would just, and he didn't like the overtone on the high G on the G. So, and he would just rip, and it was mind numbing in a great way. So I got to know him, but I got to know him because I was in the Rising Star Festival at the CNE with a band playing a Sass Jordan song one year. And his a cappella group was the winner from the previous year. And they did a cover of King of Spain from the band who shall not be named anymore. But the song King of Spain. But when they did this a cappella tune, it sounded like a punk song. Like they were ripped through like they were singing a cappella. But all of a sudden it had an edge. It was unreal. So I immediately introduced myself to him afterwards. And the interesting story about that is at the time this was happening, the Coasters, the band The Coasters, Yakety Yak, Don't Talk Back, they were doing like an oldies show at the band shell while we were doing the Rising Star gig on the side stage somewhere, right? And they heard Matt Osborne's band singing, and the Coasters came over and were like, damn, this kid can sing.
Sounds right.
And that's probably when I was like, I'm going to stay friends with this gentleman, right? And and so that's that's how I met him. That's how we came into our orbit. And before Tara talks a bit about how he came into the project that we were doing, one of the greatest problems for fans of him after his passing is that there aren't really good recordings of him playing live, which is a bit of a bummer. And recently, when we were going through, we found 6 songs that were recorded on a multi-track. Well, he was opening for us one day, which gets into a bigger can of worms for down the road. But so we're looking into actually finally finishing those and putting them out in the world as well for the people who remember him as well, and that'll be pretty awesome.
A little foreshadowing.
Yeah, a little foreshadowing there. Nobody else knows that except for Tara and Jay. So, you know, anyone who might watch this who knows Matt Osborne, send me an email. We'll talk. And then Tara, coming into our,
Matt was like one of my inspirations vocally. Like his voice blew me away. I think to this date he's the most talented singer that I ever like knew. Like I don't mean like someone you're an acquaintance of or anything like that, but someone who was like part of your group or whatnot. And I would totally list him up there with my top like singing influences, like Steve Page and Alanis Morissette and I can't think of anybody else right now. John Popper. But Matt had this way of making you feel like you were the only person listening to the song, like making you feel like it was you and him, and the song was some sort of inside joke, but not a joke between the two of you. Like, and that intimacy he created was something that I think I sought my entire time performing. It was like trying to find that spot that where he got that. And it had nothing to do with like he's an amazing singer vocally, but the how he could capture a room, it blew my mind. Like we were playing the circus room in Kitchener, and it was like this drunken bar with like 5 people in it, and they didn't talk the entire time Matt performed. Like they had that kind of respect for him. Like they talked through our whole set. And then we got heckled at the end. But Matt, you could hear a pin drop, and it just, so the opportunity to have Matt sing on the album, I couldn't not do. And to have him be like a chorus of men singing behind me was like, you know, a fantasy of mine. So
for anyone listening, it's on If I Laugh as well.
And he came in and he said, I think we were going to just get him to do a single harmony with you, and he was like, no. And I think he just told the Brian, I'll do 3 tracks and I'll just keep singing.
Yeah.
And what you hear is, it's a choir of Matt's. It's fantastic.
I remember asking him, and he's like, anything for you, darling. And I was just like,
oh yeah, sounds great.
Like I was like,
no, he was.
I was like
he was so sweet in that way. He would
like
come and
15-year-old girl at a Backstreet Boy concert. Like that's the only way I can describe it. Like, near Matt Osborne, I was like, oh my god, you're here and I'm here and it's happening. Like,
and one of the songs that they always used to sing together, which is of course not an original Seth song, is the song "Lovers in a Dangerous Time," and that was sort of the song whenever we got them in the same. I think we even did this. Did we do this at the release party?
Did it at the release party? Yeah, we.
Yeah, we would always try and we'd work at that tune, and you guys would sing together, and it always sounded so.
Oh yeah,
just there was something extra about it when you sang. Like there was that intimacy was happening between you guys and us, and it was great. And
beautiful.
Just as a little plug, when this remaster hits iTunes on the same day, there are going to be 2 other Uncle Seth releases hitting iTunes, but they're not previous records. They're stuff I found on the way to making this record. So one of them is called Lame Suburban Demos, and it's like stuff that we had worked up before we went into the studio with Brian. Probably we played them for Drew, you know, and that was the process of. So there's a couple on there that never made the record, and they're very interesting and not the greatest, but they're definitely a demo thing. And another release is called Playing Shaker and Other Stuff You Probably Shouldn't See, which is just stuff that I found that I I wanted people to have a chance to hear live stuff. I mean, I'm not sure they're from all over the place, but we used to do this thing where we grab our guitar and run out into the audience and play in the audience. And there's a really weird recording of us doing that with a tune, and it sounds not great, but the vibe is there. But on that, there's also the first time you ever sang "Lovers in a Dangerous Time" with Matt is actually on that. It's not the greatest recording. There's a lot of restoration involved, but like it's there and it's something, and you can kind of hear the vibe on it too. So
that last thing notwithstanding, the upshot of all this is I should have deleted a lot of this crap off my hard drive a long time ago, and I'm too diligent about backing up my hard drive.
This is also an intervention, Jay. This
That's
has
right.
quarters. This is
I
what
have a
it's all
lot of
about.
crap on my hard drive.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Matt, like the link with us, I couldn't find that recording and not put that on something because it's just this connection to the band's kind of too important.
Yeah.
All right, so that last comment kind of leads nicely into some of the, I'll call them rapid fires. There's not many of them. I'll say on a scale of 1 to 5, and somebody can yell out what the answer is, where 5 is extremely unlikely. Sorry, 1 is extremely unlikely, and 5 is very likely. A live recording, or ideally live album release.
Which was the very likely part? Which one was that?
Very likely is 5.
5. It's 5. There is a whole show, multi-track recorded,
there's stuff coming.
that exists.
And here, okay.
That's happening.
So that's a live album. Is there a likelihood that you guys would go into the studio to record any song again?
I would say it's a 5, but I don't want to speak for Jay and Tara.
I would say it's an eventual 5. I think the biggest challenge with that is and that might also involve everybody on this call. It might involve some other people too, because there were other people in the band over time. I do think it wouldn't necessarily happen soon, largely because some people have little children now. Some of our children are grown, but that is part of
little
that.
People always get in the way.
That I know.
Yeah,
That's true, right? So yeah, 10 years ago it was always my fault.
Right?
But I would say it's at least a 4, but not
okay. So that's for
necessarily.
any song. What about for re-recording the album or recording a whole new album?
Do albums exist anymore? Is that a thing that?
Yeah, I put out 3 albums last year. No. I think it's not entirely out of the question. Although I think with this configuration of people and the sort of Uncle Seth related things, I think it's probably, again, maybe something could happen someday.
Hold on.
But probably not soon.
All right, so Jay, I'm gonna get you to stop promoting and do a poll. Andrew,
Sure,
are you in?
Sure.
All right, excellent. Mark, you're in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right, Brian, you're in.
I'm in. Let's do
Jeff,
it.
you're in.
Good, of course, yeah.
Tara.
I'll have to check my schedule.
Oh,
There it
God.
is.
So it sounds like Jay is the holdout here, is what I'm hearing.
So I'll upgrade it. I'll upgrade it to a 4.
Okay, I'll tell you a couple things. First of all, Jay is oddly conservative sometimes, and that's awesome. That's part of what makes the editing process in this band, or it did, really effective. Like to get by Jay's concerns, it had to be really great, and that's amazing. Because I am not, and I need that, generally speaking. But so the original idea for this band, and it much probably to my detriment to a certain extent, was that I wanted it to be a vibe. I wanted it to be like a vibe or some kind of community thing or something. Probably listening to too much Fish at the time, but I love the idea when we're talking about this, and I love the idea of, especially with what's available now, if we were to record 1 or 2 things, I'd like it to open up to absolutely anyone we ever played with to contribute something.
Yeah, I'd like
because it's possible, like everyone can add things from home, even. Like it would be really fun to curate like the Uncle Seth Collective or whatever, however many people were in this band, whoever wants to contribute, whoever's got time to contribute, oh, Mark's busy, just a shaker part, cool, get it, like whatever's doable, and I think it might be really fun to see collectively what could be made. But again, Jay's point's really important too, which is we're all very kind of weirdly busy in different directions, obviously. So
yeah,
Did we
I might
clarify what playing shaker is? Because I feel like
it's no. You gotta download the release to find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Because I feel like Anyways,
Stay tuned. No, it's not what you think.
Oh,
It's way
but
worse. I felt I have to sort of answer that slightly, which is it's true because I often throw up these things and it's not to be negative, but it's also I do like to I think it comes from my thing of I hate to let people down, which is I don't want to say, yeah, let's do that thing and then not do the thing. And people feel like, and maybe this is on me, but then I feel like people are going, oh, you said he was going to do the thing, or they said the thing was going to happen, and the thing didn't happen. So I always kind of feel like, okay, if we're going to say it's going to happen, we should figure out some way it's going to happen, or someone, probably me in my own little weird mind, will be upset. But I do tend to do that a little bit, but I do also feel like there's always room for those kinds of collaborations, and we've done mostly Terry and Jeff and I have done stuff, from time to time over the years. We recorded a song, we've done some little shows and some things like that. So there's room for those things, and there's room, I think, for people to collaborate in different ways. And I mean, I've done records where I've brought in people proxy to the band. Like I had Chris Geiger, who was the drummer later on in the band. He sang on a song for me. Lots of things like that, right? So there's those kinds of opportunities too, where it's not Uncle Seth and the new Uncle Seth thing, but it could be, sort of in the Uncle Seth universe. And I think there's definitely a huge room for that.
The last rapid fire question. 1-5. Performing again as a unit, this collective here, and specifically as I think about it, how there's this revival about bands performing their concept albums from beginning to end in one live show. So going out and doing lame suburban poetry beginning to end with this group.
Who would show up?
Who would show up? Well, when are you playing? I think I speak for at least 10 other people.
No.
Oh my God, 10 people.
Amazing.
That'll be our biggest gig ever.
I was going to say, that would be that would be mid-range for us.
Right, like this, especially this era.
I don't know. I was at the Merchant Tap House when Uncle Seth played. Now, granted, it wasn't just Pab. There was I think they called them Dem Bitches, which was a wedding party or a bridal party. And then wasn't there also a collection of cougars? I think that place had like about 500 people in it that night.
That was a massively crazy gig. That was, we'll talk about that when we do I assume at some point we're going to do a remaster for some more stuff. We'll talk about those things later, because that was more in that era.
There's like teenage things on stage. That's what I remember.
Anyways, likelihood you guys will perform this album as a unit.
Well, I think you should go around the circle again, and I think you should go around the circle again, Mark, and ask him.
All right, I'll start with you, Drew.
Would I get together 20 years later with these guys and play this record on stage?
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Attaboy.
Awesome.
All right, I'll put you. Brian, and then will you do ring for that? No.
I do not do
mobile
live
recording
sound
unit.
engineering. So I'll be there to cheer them on.
You can
and you played on the record. You come play your solo on Destination.
That's true.
Oh yeah.
Was it Bone Dry Monsters?
Yeah.
Mr. Kitchen.
I'm there. I'm in.
Yeah.
All right. Tara?
Yeah. I'm
What about
anything
Mark?
to make my kid think I was cool.
Mark said he's there.
If you give me 6 months so I don't suck, I'll be there.
Okay.
That's how I feel.
Sorry, Tara, I didn't hear your answer.
Oh yeah, I'm in anything to make my son think I'm cool. I'm totally down for it, because right now he is completely unimpressed with me. So the 5-year-old think I'm lame. So
wait till they become 14. It's a whole new set. Jeff?
Sure, why not? If we find a date, of course.
All right.
I practice now. I'm way better.
Excellent. So Jay,
I'm absolutely 100% in.
Okay, excellent. So that's rapid fire. I could easily talk to you guys for hours. There's a million questions. We didn't touch on songwriting at all. We're all a bunch of talkers, and we could carry on forever. But I think that one of the toughest things to do, one of the most important things to do, is to leave them wanting more. And so it's probably a good time to stop. But I will say a few things as both the person who's invited to host us and also as a fan. First of all, thank you very much for the gift of a great album.
Thanks.
The music is great. It's a ton of fun to listen to. It's been a long time since I've listened to Lane Suburban Poetry beginning to end. I was telling Jay and Tara at the beginning before everybody else joined. It comes up on shuffle periodically because it is on my iTunes, along with some other Uncle Seth stuff, including some stuff that I recorded from the audience myself. Not going to say how or where, but it was a fun to listen to the album several times, cover to cover, because in the original they listened to the remaster. So hats off to Jeff for doing yeoman's job, really bringing up the album. And thank you also for the gift of inviting me here to hang out with you guys for almost 2 hours now, chatting, talking about great music, talking with great people, and recounting. One of the things that I really loved about this conversation, because it could have gone in any number of ways, but one of the things I geek out on, and people who've known me for years know this, is the creative process is just like that. That's where the juices start to flow. It's like you just get all excited about just the creative process, sometimes to the detriment of actually doing something, just like reading and hearing about other people's process. So the last 90 minutes, give or take, with you guys has totally scratched that itch, and I love my base and figure out what I can actually hammer out right having spent after this time, you guys. And so on top of everything else, thank you for the inspiration. I'm sure I speak for others who have listened to your music and who may hear this, that you give us something every time we get to your Uncle Seth music. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
That's very nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
I just want to say thanks to everyone for still existing. It's so great to see everyone again.
I didn't die.
Yeah, it was touch and go for a while with a few of us, but yeah.
Right?
Can't take it for granted these days.
Yeah.
I went on me.
So thank you guys, and I'm gonna now stop the recording, but we can hang out.